an architecture media podcast supported by the Australian Institute of Architects, produced on Boonwurrung country.
Welcome to Design Speaks Weekly, a podcast that explores the biggest stories in Australian architecture and design. I'm your host, Georgia Burks, and today I speak with Amy Seo, architect and co-founder of Second Edition, a Sydney-based practice that sources discarded materials from demolition and construction sites and repurposes them for new creations. We chat about how Amy works with waste. But first, here's the latest news headlines from Architecture AU.
In the news this week, a petition is launched opposing Victorian government plans to abolish the Architects Registration Board of Victoria and fold it into a new business and professions super regulator. Petitioners warn the move would strip architecture of the independent specialist oversight that protects both the profession and the public. And a master plan for Newcastle Quay has been revealed, marking the final stage in Newcastle's three-decade foreshore transformation. The $1.6 billion precinct is set to deliver approximately 1,000 homes and more than 11,000 square metres of public open space. Those are the headlines for this week. For the full stories and more news, visit architectureau.com. I'm Adair Winder. It's Tuesday, May 26.
The design and construction industry generates some of the largest amounts of waste in Australia. Approximately 26.8 megatons were recorded during the 2022 to 2023 financial year. In response to this excess, Amy Seo and co-founder Shahar Cohen created Second Edition to explore new ways of working with materials that would otherwise end up in landfill. By designing their own projects and collaborating with other architects, Amy and Shahar seek to educate and advocate for deconstruction as an alternative to demolition. In today's episode, I speak with Amy about whether or not there is appetite for this approach on projects right across Australia. Hello, Amy, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Georgia. How you going?
I'm well. It's good to have you here. Amy, you and Shahar have been running Second Edition for just over 4 years and have completed a number of residential and interior projects which repurpose materials from demolition sites. Your mission literally turns trash into treasure. What has been the most common salvageable building material you have come across when sourcing from demolition sites, and what have you found to be its best use?
So I was thinking about this. Kitchens actually in their entirety is a really there's an existing market for it, and they're actually quite valuable when sold as an entirety. That was really a surprising kind of discovery that we made in the process of actually finding receivers for the material. Like timbers have always been such a great and salvageable building material, and historically as well, with any type of solid material, anything that can be repaired, anything that retains its value in the process of deconstruction will be inherently more valuable than, say, something that would come apart during the deconstruction process. So we always look for this kind of criteria of solidity, which helps us essentially, if something is damaged, you can repair it and it retains its material value.
So that would be like sanding it back and, recoating it.
Yeah, exactly. So like when I say like framing timbers, I'm talking like particularly old growth Oregon. So Oregon or hardwoods. And Oregon I think it's typically in like, I want to say pre-1980s. It was used as framing timbers. It's kind of what radiator pine is used a lot now. So that's your internal stud work. Timbers that come from roof structure is really valuable. The spans are often really long and they have less nails in it than, say, timber floor joists. Actually, flooring as well. Timber in its multitude of different formats can really be used in so many different applications, from furniture, also being reapplied as structure, provided it's in a good quality. High quality fixtures and fittings as well. So if it's a brand either currently in production or has like a heritage status or is just a good quality fixture from reputable brands, we will tend to salvage them no matter how old they are. So things like Vola, which is like a Danish sanitary ware company. And the reason for that is because often with these classic designs, the same design has been like minorly modified in the past like 50 years. And often because they're high quality, they've obviously stood the test of time. And patina is always something that is appreciated. And I think like when something is designed well from the outset, it will hold its value and we'll be able to find use for it in a project. It's like good design should be timeless, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And thinking about these timbers or high quality fixtures and fittings, but particularly, I guess, the solid materials you're talking about, reclaimed materials aren't typically regular in shape and size. How do you factor this into your design concepts and material schedules for the builders? How does that work?
Yes. So we design iteratively and with tolerances. So when we start a project and we first design the layout and the general form, from there we develop a color palette. And that color palette essentially gives us a guideline to then find materials that might fit within that color palette. We try to design using fairly simple material selections and also with an understanding of availability. So neutrals are always really quite favorable. Fixtures and fittings that are classic, like either chrome or brushed nickel. It's kind of understanding what we could source either through secondhand, discontinued stock, or through waste material. From that, we then produce a set of quantity, BOQs, so bill of quantities, which has areas, square meterage, and just quantities that we need to actually source. And from there, we then begin to refine what the actual specification is. It's fairly typical in terms of an architectural process, but it's not typical in the sense that we don't know the specifics at the beginning and we kind of let the material guide the end outcome. And the reason why we do that is because it's all about availability. And I think now, having been kind of operating in this process for the past 4 years, we've kind of realized that you have to just be flexible and be able to adapt based on available material sources.
And so you'd be thinking about tolerances and designing tolerances into your projects.
Yeah, and tolerances in the sense that like there's like it could be a tap fitting from this place or this place. It can be a tile size that could work with 50 by 50, 100 by 100, 200 by 100, 200 by, yeah, you know, like so we can kind of like adapt it to make it, but we know how much we need to source, and it's a matter of, if we've only got X square meters of this and X square meters of that, how do we actually combine the two tile types and make it logical within a project? So for the bathrooms at the Rochester offices, the original design was based on this kind of like Es Devlin Yeezy image where it was this like vibrant yellow space. Now, trying to achieve that level of yellow would have only been possible through like a pigment put through the render or whatever to achieve this like just a uniform colored space or a paint color or whatever. We were looking at in terms of utilizing a recycled material, and the recycled material that we ended up with was recycled terracotta, so terracotta roof tiles. So obviously that's a very different color to yellow, but it meant that the key concept was having a single color that dictated the space. They were really open to achieving that same impact through other material types. And what we ended up doing was actually using a recycled terracotta aggregate that was then used for the flooring and the walls. Now we ended up having to add excess pigment that we had for grout, like that we had left over from another project. But it worked quite well because it ended up being this like super earthy red. And that was kind of like quite an interesting process of how the importance of the color was carried through, but the actual end outcome was quite different.
I think that speaks to what you said earlier about letting the material kind of evolve the design and having flexibility, being okay to be flexible as well. It's a great example there, Amy. Australia's construction industry is highly risk averse, which has its advantages and disadvantages. In relation to this, selected building materials often have to meet specific performance criteria that can cover anything from acoustics, thermal properties, structural integrity, or fire safety. With this in mind, how do you see the application of salvage materials scaling up to larger projects across Australia?
So this is a really interesting question because it's something that we've been dealing with more recently in some of the bigger projects that we've been involved in. Now, most of our current experiences are in primarily class 1, which is residential development. And as a baseline, it's always really important that that there's clear communication with the client and the builder who's installing the salvage material. There's also an inspection process and, if necessary, a testing process. Now, testing salvage material will be the biggest hurdle to jump in the ability to scale up salvaged materials for larger projects or commercial projects. Now, we're kind of looking at that process, and it's been really eye-opening in the material type of salvage stone. So we've been engaged by a bigger practice to help them source salvage stone for a facade in the city. They've been incredible. Like, they've been so supportive, and it's been so exciting to see them get excited about the possibility of using this material. Now, what's become apparent is that for the type of fixing materials that they're trying to do, there is like a 5-part testing process to determine the characteristics of a salvage stone to then make sure it's applicable for its fixing detail in its new application. Now, this has to be done regardless of new or salvage, but it's almost more tedious, or it's more kind of onerous for salvage because it's from so many different sources. How do we encourage salvage materials for larger projects will be a building up of this kind of corporate knowledge. Okay, what testing is necessary for this material? What's testing necessary for that material? And as we kind of try more and more, I think there is a place for people like us who have consultancy, who actually have been developing, understanding who works with the material, how to test it, what tests to do, what kind of engineering needs to be considered. Because at the end of the day, kind of anything is possible. It's just a matter of how do you navigate through whatever regulations you need to. And because it's not common, but it is, just have to kind of like go through the process and see, okay, so marbles aren't really suitable to be used as salvage stone, but granites can be because they're much denser. And that's like in this whole process, I'd be like, well, I'll be very happy to recommend that to a client next time and be less inclined to recommend a marble. But it's still like we're all learning about it and we're still trying to understand where the push and pull is. But it will be, it's like kind of like you have to just build up the infrastructure and frameworks around it as we try more.
Absolutely. And I think, circular economy and circular design is still quite in its infancy here in Australia. And certainly it's about rethinking the systems and the processes of architecture and construction, right? And second edition's work seeks to redefine these architectural systems. What role does technology play in this? Like, do you see AI potentially as a tool that could help document and categorize materials or even suggest ways that they might be designed for disassembly?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I mean, like I haven't dug that far in to AI in terms of how it could be used to determine the potential of a material, but we've definitely used it as a resource to understand compliance and standards, to ask it questions to help us kind of navigate something so then we can cross-check it against standards and NCC and all those kind of frameworks. It's so localized and so nuanced being able to use salvage material. So I wonder at what point it would actually become useful as like an immediate tool. Shahar's actually a lot more savvy than I am. So I'm still learning.
Yeah, we're all still learning. What do you think the appetite for circulating products and materials is in Australia? Do you think there's potential for this approach to become the norm, or do you think it'll still be deemed quite risky?
So I think it can become more commonplace. That's for sure. I think there's always going to be an element of risk associated with it because you never get a product disclosure statement or you never get the warranties that you would with a new product, right? So you're always going to have a QA process of determining whether or not a salvaged material is going to be suitable for its like future application. There's always that degree of research and kind of risk, but you can mitigate the risk. You can understand, well, is that piece of timber going to hold up as like a chair leg? You know, like you can kind of really dumb it down to like structurally, you can make a common sense argument. It just matters on the scale of application. What we're interested in more than just salvage material is actually the transfer of material from one place to the next. So if a material has been used as one purpose, which requires a certain set of structural benchmarks to be met, it can be used as another application, maybe more in the furniture or more in the kind of interior space, which has less structural limitations. Now, that's kind of like understanding how it can be applied is then how you actually mitigate the risk, I guess. But it's actually developing those systems of reuse that needs to be hopefully more commonplace. It's for people to see the value. I think people always see the value in materials, but how they see its second application is where that's kind of being developed. One of the projects which is quite interesting that we're looking at the moment is a facade or salvaging a stone facade in the city. Now, this is quite typical of a lot of different civic buildings where you have external stone cladding. And the system of stone cladding is actually quite favorable to deconstruction. It's inherently deconstructible. And so firstly, if you're able to extract that material, the thickness that it often comes in is between like 32 to 50 mil thick. 32 is quite common, or 30. And imagine if you could find a developer like Mirvac or Lendlease to then actually use that salvage stone for bench tops. Now, obviously, it's not going to require the same level of structural integrity if it was sitting on a kerf rail, which is essentially where it's fixed with like an aluminium frame, but it would essentially be sitting on carcasses on a horizontal plane. So it's such a good application to reuse the material without being limited by its structural capacity. Now, one of the big hurdles of being able to scale up material reuse is essentially lining up material at the time that it's needed for a project. You're always left with essentially a timeline issue. It's like, is the material coming down 4 months before you need it? Or does it need to be stored? Who's going to process it? Does it need to be cleaned? And kind of like all of these steps in the process, I think are really amazing. Firstly, really amazing opportunities for local economy. When you're able to find salvage material in high quantities, it's really great because then you can try to reuse it on bigger projects. Right now, when we salvage material, it's on a residential house scale and we make it into furniture. It's incredibly bespoke because it needs to be, because that's what we can manage our risk. But there is a huge opportunity to essentially develop an infrastructure around salvaging good quality civic material and finding ways in which to reuse it on new projects, because there's so many opportunities within the actual extraction process and the reusing process to actually generate a local economy, from the materials handling to the storage to the processing for reuse. What plays into it, it's like the question is actually bigger, and it's more around like, what do you accept as acceptable, I guess, like product? Will you accept imperfections?
I think that's a great question that we all should be asking ourselves and asking clients. And Amy, to end our episode, what's something you've changed your mind about?
I would say since starting second edition, I think developing our method of designing has been like a huge unlearning process. Like the fact that we have to design with tolerances and we have to really adapt, that what we may think something may look like from the outset may not look like at the end, I think has been something that I had to come to terms with. Also accepting that the materials that we use, they're not perfect products and they shouldn't be perfect products. It doesn't always have to be perfect. So I think that's been really eye-opening and exciting as well, because I think you appreciate how materials can be, well, like actually the material's value, like, and its integrity, how you can rework it and it means that it's still good. So I actually also think that secondhand and reclaimed material can be suitable for professional practice. So I think that there's obviously a certain stigma associated with reuse or secondhand. It's operates really in the DIY space, particularly when it comes to secondhand building products. But I do think this mindset is shifting. I do think that obviously I'm biased, I operate in this space, but I do think there is a space for it in professional practice.
I agree with you, Amy. Thank you so much for your insight and your stories today. It's always super fun talking to you.
Likewise. Thanks, Georgia.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode, which is supported by the Australian Institute of Architects. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a rating. I'm Georgia Burks, and this has been Design Speaks Weekly. Design Speaks Weekly is produced on Boonwurrung country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture.